Hello once again and welcome back to the HIN Show. I'm Marcus Botzer. Today I have with me a return guest, Mr. Godfrey Bloom, that many of you will recognise, but for new viewers, listeners and subscribers, let me just give you a little insight into this man's background, if I may. Godfrey is a published military historian. He has the RMA from Sandhurst Soviet Studies. He also is a member of the Royal College of Defence Studies. He is an expert in armed forces parliamentary schemes. He's been a guest lecturer at several universities, such as the Eisenhower Defence University in Washington, the Joint Services Staff College of Shivram, the London School of Economics at Syracuse University in New York, and also Cambridge University. And I think it's just very important that viewers and listeners who maybe do know who Godfrey is but don't know the background get the background, because it weighs very heavily into everything the man is saying, rather than just being some random that I've pulled in. But after all that, Godfrey Bloom, how are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you so much, and it's a great pleasure to be on your show again.
Always fantastic to see you, and you're very prolific. And that's a great thing, because you're someone that can speak with all the experience from the belly of the beast. But today we're going to be looking at a subject that fascinates us both. And this is the anti-Russian CIA MI6 propaganda that's going on, this Russophobia that we continually hear throughout the mainstream media in relation to, especially right now, the special operations that are going on between Ukraine and Russia. Can we just put that to you as an opening gambit, sir?
Yes, it's interesting, this concept of Russophobia, which is only just being discussed a little bit more than it ever has been. And of course, it starts a lot longer ago than a lot of people might imagine. And I was just doing some more research on this, because I'm always writing articles or speaking at universities or something. Not that I do so much of that these days, or even military colleges. And the important thing to remember is, if you go back to the 1850s, for example, you will find Russophobia raising its head then in the 1850s. And of course, the great John Stuart Mill actually was castigating the government for increasing its defence spending on the basis that it was based on Russophobia and anti-Tsarist Russia, and it was a waste of money, etc., etc., etc. But of course, in those days, we had a strategic implication because, as every schoolboy will know, we had the India, the Indian subcontinent was the supposed jewel in the crown of the British Empire. And of course, just the other side of Afghanistan, the Russians were there. It was, of course, as you will know, Mark, because I know you have a great interest in this kind of thing yourself, known as the Great Game. And the Great Game was the shenanigans that went on between the Tsarist Russia and the British Empire, looking for advantage in that particular theatre. So Russophobia has been with us for well over 150 years, which I find a fascinating thing. And I was listening to a lecture only this morning on why that should be, but that's a rabbit hole. At the moment, I don't think there's actually worth going down. Because it doesn't really take us anywhere. But we must understand that Russophobia is a very real thing, and has been a real thing for some time, for some years. And what we have now, of course, is the CIA, who is stirring a pot, as they also do. And it's not the Middle East, it's in the Ukraine, so on and so forth. What we have to remember is that the Russian Federation collapsed, and the Soviet Union collapsed and became the Russian Federation again. And instead of taking this opportunity of disbanding NATO, or at least freezing NATO, what we did was absolutely rather stupid. We started to expand NATO eastwards. You couldn't think of a more stupid thing to do. And the Russians were saying, the Russian diplomats were a completely different set of people from the Soviet Union diplomats, saying, why are you doing this? This is an opportunity for peace, long-term strategic peace. And the Russian Federation wanted to be part of Europe. That's what they wanted to do. And that makes sense. It made sense for everybody. And of course, this artificial hostility between now Europe and the Russian Federation has broken the German economy. It's broken the German economy, and of course, the German economy was the linchpin and engine room of the European Union, and it's all gone down the lavatory because of the Sowell's thing, as it was in the days of John Stuart Mill. We are dealing with the military complex, the military geopolitical military complex of which Eisenhower warned us in 1960 in his departing speech. We know about this. We know it's all about money, as all wars are. It's about banking. It's about money. It's about propaganda. And we're having to listen to this nonsense in our press and our state media broadcasts, which is all funded and put forward by CIA, MI6, which is institutionally Russophobic, to nobody's benefit but those bankers or arms manufacturers of whom we hear so much. But this is just crazy. And we're seeing, and here I blame people like supposed independent tough guys like Andrew Neil, who read out CIA press releases as though they're holy writ, holy fact. So your real problem is the CIA and MI6, and in the Middle East, it's Mossad. They are your problems. Ordinary people, folks like you and me, in the pub or in a French pub, or if they had pubs, this kind of thing. This is the problem. Ordinary folk don't want war. I don't want war. They've just laid off in Germany something like Volkswagen have laid off something like, I think it is 100,000 workers. And that's all can be traced back to this fake argument with the Russian Federation. Ordinary people are suffering. And we've got some really, really loud warmongers who are sponsored by MI6, who are calling for increased defense spending in this country because we're under threat from the Russian Federation. It's absolute bullshit, and it needs to be exposed.
Oh, absolutely. And the last time we actually heard from President Putin was an interview he gave a couple of years ago with Tucker Carlson, who is a journalist of the highest repute, at one point the most viewed journalist of all time. Whereas during that interview, Godfrey, President Putin put it to Tucker that he had a conversation with Bill Clinton, who was the American president at the time, for Russia to join NATO and focus on Islamic extremism.
Well, of course, there's all these stories, some of which are apocryphal, I think, and some of which probably aren't. But if you think, see, Putin is a chess player. He's a very high standard chess player. He's multilingual, and he's a trained economist. He sits down. I'm not a Putin stooge, incidentally. If people saying, "Oh, you're a Putin stooge," he pays you. No, he doesn't. No, he doesn't. I'm a trained strategist. I specialize in strategy at the Royal College of Defence Studies. I actually know about this. All right. Sure. I know about this. Now, you may not agree with me. For goodness sake, don't think I'm some kind of stooge or some sort of gobshite in the golf club. I know exactly what I'm talking about because I've been studying this for decades and decades. So here we have a problem, but we're missing opportunities. We've missed opportunities, and it's to our cost because war never wins. And you could go right back to 1914, where ironically, Tsarist Russia was our ally. You can go back to, they didn't come in the war, the 1939 war, they didn't come until gone 1940, when Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. And they became a strategic ally of ours. So the point is that if you look at history, if you make the effort to look at history, and of course people don't, people read the Daily Express. I mean, I meet people in my pub who think they are my equal because they've read this morning's Daily Express. Very frustrating. If people just drilled down and did some history, they'd find out exactly how these things work and could work and should work, but they don't because people have got too much skin in the game if they're working for arms manufacturers or whatever else goes with warfare, which is normally banks, which always fund both sides, of course, as we know from the Rothschilds.
Absolutely. And just to put back what you're saying, the Eurozone is collectively broke. In the last quarter, 2026, the GDP was in recession. It was minus 0.2, whereas the Russians, it's roughly about 2%. They have no money whatsoever. They're totally broke. They don't make anything. The borders are open. They have mass immigration. The Islamification of Europe is happening. But what we saw yesterday was, as Keir Starmer, Fabian boy, exit stage left, off to the loving arms of another Fabian Macron, we saw him sign off to put Great Britain into the war chest for Ukraine. This £90 billion piss take. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, again, of course, those who actually can be bothered to actually look at the very recent modern history of the Ukraine will know that in 2014, a government was elected in a democratic election, was elected, which was relatively pro-Russian Federation in as far as strategic or the economic views were concerned, and that made sense for them. That was a democratic election. Which was actually overturned then by the CIA, yet another CIA-inspired regime change. A few years later, they had a stooge, of course, with Zelensky in 2017, I think it was. He came about on the back of the CIA, and that was the proxy war that the CIA wanted, America wanted, the arms manufacturers and banks wanted, because they thought that would all be jolly good for everybody. And that's how it happened. It was not the wish of most Ukrainian people. Now, here's an interesting thing. In 2022, there was a peace offer on the table, which was negotiated in Istanbul, and it had everybody, it was initiated by everybody. It was on the table. It was a very generous terms by today's standards, very generous terms. And it's worth reading again for those of you who can be bothered to look it up and see that it was very generous terms. The Russians just said, stop killing and persecuting ethnic Russians in Ukraine. Let's all get back to square one, and let's be friends and let's trade and all the rest of it. And that was what was on the table. And Boris Johnson flew out and said, oh dear, no, you don't want to do that. We'll support you. NATO will support you all the way with arms and all the rest of it. And we'll do our best to make sure that you win. You will win, and don't go forward with this. And of course, we all know how that's ended. That's ended very badly, and that was a very generous peace offer. That's now off the table. And of course, another thing that's just popped up, isn't it? It's interesting, as they're hounding Nigel Farage, for whom I hold no particular brief about his 5 million. What's very interesting is that Boris Johnson, who flew out there to kill that peace treaty, took £1 million from arms manufacturers for drones. In the United States, £1 million, and nobody's talking about it, Mark. Nobody's bothering to talk about the corruption with people who have been in office. We're only interested in people who haven't declared things before they go into office. What about these people who make money having been in office? So we're talking about George Osborne. We're talking about Boris Johnson.
David Cameron, the Panama Papers.
David Cameron. Now, here's an interesting thing that David Cameron said only 6 months ago. Okay, he's not in office now. I've never had any time for the man. I think he's a bit of a buffoon. He must have faked his first at Oxford. Nobody that dumb.
He's an old Etonian, Godfrey. Don't forget.
Eton and Oxford. He didn't know on the American TV the date of Magna Carta. He didn't know that. How do you get a first at Oxford when you don't know shit from clay? Anyway, leaving that aside, he came out the other day and said a few weeks ago, we must supply Ukraine with weapons that can actually strike deep into the heart of Russia. Can you imagine anybody saying something that dangerous and stupid? Because what will happen is, under international law, the Russian Federation could quite easily call us combatants in this. We've got special forces out there. We give them Storm Shadow missiles. We give them military intelligence, satellite intelligence. We give all these things to the Ukraine. They could argue, and I think they will. Come on to that in a minute. I think they will. We are dealing with a situation when sooner or later, the opposition in the Kremlin, from people who are hardliners behind Putin, who incidentally is not a hardliner. Sure. There are people in the Kremlin who say this has gone long enough. We're fed up with all these NATO countries like Lithuania, all these chihuahuas in the Baltic, letting Ukrainian drones through their territory, through their airspace, so on and so forth, and arms manufactured in America and Britain, who are supplying this and extending the war. And we wanted peace, and it was the West that tore it up. Sooner or later, the back people, the people in the Kremlin who are not supporters of Putin's geopolitical strategy, will win through. And the only way he can get out of that the only way he can put them back into the basket, as it were, he will have to target those arms manufacturers and various other things, and he will have to strike them. And they now have very highly sophisticated Oreshnik missiles, which can travel at super speed, which nobody can do anything about at all. And he can take, for example, we've got arms manufacturers in this country in various places. He could easily just press the button. It's razor sharp, these things, and say, stop it. And there's nothing we can do. There's no defense against these Oreshnik missiles. And the trouble is that people are squawking all the time, and that you get people like Tugendhat and all the other sort of people who had a bit of military experience at platoon level. You know, they were platoon commanders. They weren't graduates of the Royal College of Defence Studies or anything like it. You know, they commanded a platoon, they got pissed in the mess, and that's about it. Or in aid of the foreign power. They're not strategists. These people still don't really understand, even they don't really understand just how unprepared for any form of war with a land power that we can be, or now an air power if you include the Oreshnik missiles. The whole thing is so dangerous and frightening, it's unbelievable. And any historian will just look back at 1914 and go, this is exactly how we got into the shit in 1914, and nobody could stop it. It ran away with us. And if we're not careful, we'll find ourselves in the same situation. And America will not come in. No. America will say, you could beat the bollocks out of Europe.
Sure.
We will not come in. We've got no missiles left. We've got nothing left. And we are an air power and a sea power. We're not a land power either, incidentally. And this is how it will all. And everybody in the future will look back, maybe in 10, 15, 20, if it does kick off like this, they will look back and say, how did they let that happen? In the same way we look back at 1914 and go and say, how the hell did that happen?
Well, it's a very, very bleak proposition, but it's realistic. No one can argue against that. And when people will be saying, well, what is the end goal? The NATO, the EU empire building, they tore up the Minsk Agreement 2014. You talk about the disinformation from the CIA, from MI6, from, you've mentioned the Israeli counterintelligence and secret service, Mossad. They're a big player in this, the industrial complex. People will say, listen to the experts like Godfrey, because Russians will never submit. They will never give in. If the EU think that they can conquer Russia, I mean, they really need to go down and be in a padded room in a straitjacket. And I'm not pro-Russia or pro-Putin. I'm pro-peace, like yourself. I want to see this madness end. But where is the end game for these psychopaths who want to go head-to-head with Russia other than some sort of nuclear conflict?
It's amazing. I don't understand anybody other than the banks and the arms manufacturers who get a win out of this. And of course, at the I wasn't at the staff college but I can give you a quotation from Field Marshal Montgomery, who was leaving the room after giving a lecture in Camberley at the staff college, and somebody asked her one last question. He said, "Yes, can you give us a one-liner, Field Marshal, a one-liner?"
Yeah.
Just to sort of set us straight before we all depart. And his one-liner was, yes, never march on Moscow. That was his quote. It's in the Oxford Book of Quotations. And that's what he said. And that's what we have people who are trying to prod us into doing. And just to sort of look at the situation, Napoleon made the mistake of invading Tsarist Russia. And so did the Germans in 1941. All these things, it's always ended very badly. And so consequently, we should be looking at history. But of course, we've also got a press, similarly to 1914, the press were in favor of war. The Northcliffe press were in favor of war. And so all the newspapers were, it'll be over by Christmas. Let's let's beat the Hun. Let's do this, and the other. The press, in the same way that all the press today are anti-Russian Federation, because there's too many fingers in the pie. There's too many people making a buck here and there unseen. And of course, what we also have now is no independent editorials. There are no independent editorials. We are in a terrible situation where we don't really have what I would call a free press. So consequently, nobody is, for example, in the old days of the lead of the Daily Telegraph, we'd have Claire Hollingworth and John Keegan, who were real experts. And John Keegan was a lecturer at my old alma mater. And these people written books, and they really know what they're big, thick books and stuff. They really knew what they were doing in detail about things, and they were very, very, very good. We don't have people like that now. We don't have people like that. So your leader writers are written in a very shallow political way by their masters in the CIA and their masters in MI6. So nobody is actually coming on either television or writing editorials in newspapers to say, where are we going with this? This is actually now getting extremely dangerous. I don't think the Russian Federation and Putin are prepared to be pushed any further. And I can understand it. If there were drones, explosive drones or whatever it is landing on Moscow, if they were landing in London, we know that they were made, in Warsaw, or we knew they were made wherever they were made. If we knew all that and we had the locations, public opinion would insist there was a preemptive strike. And it, funnily, is ironically not a preemptive strike. It would be a retaliatory strike. But what are people supposed to understand? What are people supposed to know? I was talking to somebody, can't remember, I was in Wales. Wales.
I heard about your walking holiday in Wales. You were giving Wales a big up.
Just fantastic, sunny, wonderful, scenery, magnificent.
It's like going back in a time machine. You described it.
Yes, it is indeed. It is. It's such a wonderful place. Everybody's polite and nice to each other. It's like going back to the 1950s. I just love it. We go every year. But I spoke to somebody. Oh, yes, I know. I just remembered. I spoke to somebody. It was a lady who wanted to see me because she follows me on the channel. And she came out with some stuff that you really couldn't believe. She was a very big Trump supporter. I'm not anti-Trump, incidentally. I'm not an anti-Trump person. But she thought, but surely isn't that Trump's fantastic, isn't he? I mean, he's turned the American economy around and it's doing really well. And I just stared at her and I said, where do you get this kind of information? Where do you get that? And she said, well, we couldn't possibly let Iran get the bomb. I said, they murdered the one man, the head of the Shia
Ayatollah Khomeini.
Yeah, that's right. And who said that it's against Shia law in order to have a hydrogen bomb, to have a nuclear bomb. They murdered him. That was clever, wasn't it? And a couple of days later, of course, they murdered a bunch of school kids, in a school with a couple of tomahawks. And what's going on? We used to think, I was brought up, I've got an American cousin and all the rest of it, that the guys, and the Americans were the guys in the big white hats. They were the good guys. And we now live on a planet where they are quite clearly the bad guys. They are behind every coup, behind every regime change attempt. Millions, their own universities reckon that they've been responsible since 1945 for over 1 million civilian deaths. That's their own universities talking about this.
Godfrey, sorry to interrupt, Godfrey, but please explain to me how to shoot down a $20,000 drone with a $4 million missile ends well. The cost of this war is astronomical. It's running off the charts. I mean, we look at the Eurozone, they're 14 billion in the shit. The debt of the Eurozone collectively is 14 trillion, beg my pardon, with a T. Whereas the British we're at 4 trillion. We are broke. We are bankrupt. But there is no way other than looking at the end game for me that ends well for anyone in Europe or even America. There's nothing, there's no way, there's no adult there pulling back the handles. And as you said about the media, they're trying to shut down and censor. The Labour Party are trying to kill off X. They're even using the murder of poor Anne Widdecombe as part of the rationale for her demise, saying that these people that are wanting to kill far-right or right-wing commentators and politicians, they're getting all their information. So everything takes us back to that. We're being silenced. Pravda, basically, is the BBC. They're so full of leftist communists. And this is even before we get on to this question that I've got for you. The ideology of Russia and President Putin is more akin to my beliefs than the DEI program that we see festooned through every single establishment in this country. People have they're more ideologically aligned with the Christians in Russia than they are with the likes of Keir Starmer, Andy Burnham, and the the Conservatives and the Home Office, Treasury, Cabinet Office.
You're absolutely correct there. It's an interesting phenomenon that the Russian Federation is a deeply Christian nation, as it was in point of fact, of course, as you know, under the Soviet Union. The people hadn't changed. The people were still religious. So it's a Christian country with a wonderful history of art and music. It's a very sophisticated history that they have. And they are very much more, the man on the Moscow omnibus is very much like the man on the Clapham omnibus. I don't want to fight the Russian Federation. I have no interest in that. And I don't want my young friends who I work with, or my nieces or my nephews being involved in something like that, to no good purpose. If they were genuinely threatening to land on the Isle of Wight or something like that and threaten us militarily, I'd return to the colours myself, old as I am. But that's not the case. And you have to ask yourself another question. Who is your family in danger from? Let everybody just suck this one in, please. Who are you in danger from? You, your family, your sons and your daughters. They're landing at Dover as we speak today. That is your enemy. That is your enemy. Illegal immigrants landing at Dover. That is your problem. Not the Russians. I bet hardly anybody here watching this program knows any Russians. I mean, I know a few, and I've got some Russian friends. I've got some Ukrainian friends as well, incidentally. But I mean, this is just crazy. And of course, in America, where the standard of electoral intelligence is one of the lowest in the world, outside Africa, it's so low. And I've been to 35 American states. I've been there on business. I've been there on politics. And I know, as well as anybody can know, the United States, because it's so vast, that your Kansas farmer, or your Pittsburgh engineer, or whatever it happens to be, has no interest in foreign affairs at all. 2/3 of Americans don't have a foreign passport. They're not interested. And until Americans come back in body bags, they don't care about Ukrainians dying. And since Boris Johnson pulled the plug, it's estimated 1 million young Ukrainians have died. And he sleeps tight at night. He sleeps at night, no conscience, which is the mark of a sociopath. And the problem is that we have these people who are in office who are all sociopaths. Not one, I saw a program just the other day, he was actually in the Ukraine again, report from the front line, and Boris Johnson's on the TV camera. Yeah. You would thought a decent man would have gone into the study, taken out the wartime souvenir and shot himself. That's what a good, bottle of whiskey in one hand and the revolver in the other. He should shoot himself. He's a seriously bad man. But the reason is he's not bad in traditional sense. He's bad because he's emotionally unstable. As was Starmer. And I've just done an article that's gone out today, if I may plug it, with Going Postal. Yeah. But Starmer's speech, resignation speech, this is the country I love. No, it's the country you hate. And your whole front bench hates this country because you're somehow psychologically disturbed. It's self-hate which you're laying on the people of this country. This is why you're doing all these things, because you are emotionally unstable. Yeah. And this is the problem. And this is why Starmer had to go, but he still doesn't get it. And of course, we've got another guy who thinks exactly the same way. He's slightly less dislikable than Starmer. And he'll have a honeymoon lasting a few months, which will soon go away.
Well, isn't it? All of that is true. And isn't it funny how one of the major criticisms of Russia is that they are not a democracy? Whereas in this country, during the Conservative leadership campaign, you had a winner, Liz Truss, that I'm not particularly massive fan of, replaced by Rishi Sunak, where the voters and the members of the Conservative Party were an afterthought, thanks to the 1922 committee and that lot, Sir Graham Brady. They booted Liz Truss out, brought in their hatchet man, Rishi Sunak, made his money on COVID, made his money on Moderna that we've spoken about, on his shares, buggers off to the States. In the UK, you've got Keir Starmer gets booted out. Andy Burnham, one of his mates, steps down in Makerfield. Burnham's in. Burnham's now Prime Minister without any scrutiny whatsoever, and they say that the dictatorship's in Russia.
Well, if you had a man from Mars in, and he wanted to say, can you explain the difference between the Russian political system and the British political system at the moment, he would look at it and he would analyse it, assuming this Marshall was a very clever fellow. He'd sit down and say, I think this Russia thing this is what I think you call democracy, isn't it? But I'm not quite sure what you have in Britain. That doesn't seem to me very democratic. Is it fascism? And I would then say to this Marshall, I said, it's very much closer to fascism than it is democracy. And who really got rid of Liz Truss behind the scenes?
Yep.
JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, all the same names.
The Bank of Bailey.
Yes. Who's Fabian?
Who's a Fabian?
Yeah, and all these people. So, and of course, if you don't have a free press, how would you know? And do you know the class of person in this country now who are very much more up to speed, very much better informed, are your artisan class.
Sure.
We're having some cottages restored on our land. They're Sparkies, they're Chippies. They're all these people who actually are time-served apprentice people who have one-man businesses or two-man businesses. Very nice people. I get on very well with them, and I drink with them in our local pub because I find them very good company. It's fascinating when you talk to them. They're better informed than my middle-class friends who were at Oxford when I sit around a dinner party table, which I don't often these days because I'm socially excommunicated.
Persona non grata.
I'm afraid so. Who, even if they read law or history at Oxford years ago, men of my age, my own age, are woefully ill-informed. Woefully ill-informed. They haven't a clue. I don't use this in any patronising way, but I sometimes chat with our window cleaner that comes round, and he likes to stop for a yarn. It's East Yorkshire. We like a bit of a chat. He is far more informed than my Oxford friends round the dinner party table. Far more, because he's made an effort to inform himself. My friends who left Oxford, in 1969 or whenever they left Oxford, decided that's enough exams, that's enough knowledge. I'm never going to open another book again. I don't want any more knowledge. I've been cramming knowledge into my head since I was 8 years old. I'm not interested in any more knowledge. I'm going to seal off. Most of them sealed off their knowledge when they were 23 or 24. They're not open to any new thought, different thought at all. And they're not getting it from the press. Sometimes I even get told that the Spectator's a good read, because it's more objective and more. The Spectator's no better than the New Statesman when it comes to international strategy. They're all on the left. Some are extreme left, some are left of centre, but they're all left.
When you speak about these people, there are two great phrases that come to mind. The first one is, there are none so blind as those who will not see. And the second one is, if good men stand aside and do nothing, tyranny is guaranteed. Now, I could ask you, Godfrey, what possesses you? What takes hold of you to be so prevalent, so productive, so proficient in your drive of all these decades you've taken? You could just say, sod them all, I don't give a damn, done quite well, me and the missus can go anywhere in the world and sod you, bugger it. What keeps you going? Is it that fact that you are, if you don't mind me saying, one of these men that will not stand aside because you don't want to see tyranny guaranteed?
Well, you asked a very difficult question for me, really, because I was at a rugby club reunion with some chaps I hadn't seen. And I was the boy of the club when I was playing down south. I was the boy of the club. So some of these characters are 80 and they can still swamp 10 pints back in an afternoon. So they're all pretty on the ball. And one chap, I had lunch with him later because he was a bit of a schoolboy hero of mine. He won everything, he was champion of this, champion of that. Anyway, I took him to lunch and he said the same question. He said, why do you bother with this? You're whatever you are. He said, you're 75 or 75 then. He said, why don't you just, forget about it and live whatever you've got left? And I said, you're absolutely right. And I ask myself the same question sometimes. I say, why are you bothering? Why are you bothering? And the answer is, to be frank with you, Mark, I haven't a bloody clue. And I wish I wasn't. I wish there was a little button I could press, and I could just sod off and take no notice. God didn't make me like that, blast him.
Yeah.
he made me a little guy who plays number 9, and I'm a bit gobby, and I wish I wasn't, but I am.
Well, I'd say you're led by your heart. You're led by your spirit, your soul, your ancestors, what they've given you, what they've bestowed upon you. I'm not prejudging, but you may be led by a higher power, unlike our king. You may be so, and you've called for the abdication of the king. I mean, if we could just maybe finish on that. I've taken up a lot of your time, and I know it's very important that we get across the point about the propaganda, which we've covered. We've covered MI6. We've covered the infiltrators that are coming in overseas, the Fabians, the Labour Party. We haven't really touched on Anne Widdecombe or the war against reform, but that's maybe for another day. There's a lot of commentary on that right now. But just the king, Godfrey. The king has aligned himself with Islam. You have very high profile guests on your show that cut from, I think you have Queen Elizabeth's chaplain comes on your show regularly. And the bishop from Wales, his name just escaped, Bishop.
Hi.
Yeah. And these people are all of the same assessment as you, that the king is no longer a Christian man. He's no longer the head of the Church of England, and he should abdicate.
There's 2 points, main points in there. First of all, he's only just got through his coronation and took the coronation oath that he would be defender of the faith, which is quite speculative because we've seen his writings and comments and so on and so forth for some time. And I didn't think he was going to say that, defender of the faith, because he always said that he didn't want to do that, want to be defender of faith, which of course negates his whole position. In our Christian country, which is constitutionally Christian. You see, this is the point. A lot of people, because they haven't had the benefit of a formal education because of the state school took over education. So we have 2 generations of people who have absolutely no idea what our constitution. They think because it's not written, we don't have one. You'd be amazed. I would think probably 999 people out of 1,000 think we don't have a constitution because it's not written down in the same way the Americans is. And it's not their fault. I'm not blaming them for their ignorance. It's that they've been through an educational system where it was quite deliberate to keep them ignorant. Now we have a king who I would argue has already abdicated. He hasn't formally abdicated, but as soon as he will not step up and defend the Christian faith, as he is obliged to do by oath and constitutionally, he has by abstaining from that, abdicated himself. And I think that is the problem. And when Bishop Kai Dua, who's the Welsh bishop, and who I just gave him lunch the other day, actually down in Wales when I was in Pembrokeshire, he wrote and didn't get a satisfactory answer. He didn't get an answer from the king. He got an answer from a lackey at the palace. And it could have been written by Sir Humphrey Appleby. It was written by Sir Humphrey Appleby. It was about 3 paragraphs of nothing. And I think his son is an agnostic at best. And there's nothing wrong with being an agnostic. I'm not criticizing agnostics, but you cannot fulfill the role of King of England, the king and leader of the Commonwealth. If you are an agnostic, you must go. You must go. And if it has to be a Windsor, which I'm against really, because they're parvenus, the Windsors, they just turned up. You
want to see the Plantagenets return.
Well,
I want the Stuarts.
I don't know about your lot, but certainly we have an interesting situation with what we've got at the moment. Basically, they're North German middle-class parvenus, as far as I'm concerned. The whole man jack of them, I'd get shot at them. And I know I've got a friend of mine who's the Duke of Oldenburg. I don't see much of him now, but we used to be drinking mates when I was in Brussels. And Princess and some of the rest of the family. But they're direct descendants of Queen Victoria. Direct descendants of Queen Victoria. And I said to who's actually a very interesting character. But he said, we could find in our family a direct descendant who would have claim to the throne. Right. And I think we need a constitutional expert to actually find out, let's line up the people who could be king or could be queen and find out where they are and interview them. Let me interview them. I'll interview them. I'll volunteer to interview them because I'll soon expose if they're fake,
Well,
if they're shysters and fakes, like the chap we've got on the throne at the moment, I would expose them. So let's have some of that. Let's treat. I'm a monarchist, of course, Mark.
of
I'm
course,
a
as am I.
Republican. Do we
As am
want? Do
I.
we want some of the people that run republics? No,
Yeah,
thanks. What we want is a proper king
absolutely.
of the United Kingdom who believes in what everybody or most of us believe in. And of course, the other thing is, I know that we don't go to church as much as we used to. Well, that's more the
Sure.
fault of the church. It's
Yeah.
not the fault of us. When you've got idiot agnostic archbishops and bishops. I mean, up here in York Minster, we got a bloody idiot. And I'm a guide at York
Well,
Minster.
Marxist. He's most likely Marxist, Godfrey.
Stephen Cotterill, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, where's he? Would he go to the stake? Would he burn at the stake for his faith?
Well, I like
Cowboy.
what you say. Just to finish up, we've squeezed as much as we can out you. We could talk for hours, weeks, months, years, but we don't have that time, unfortunately. I like what you said on our friend Mike Graham's show, whereas you would actually like to be in charge of a re-education camp for the entire police force. You would be in charge. You would beast them until you'd squeezed the DEI juice out of them. Because I put it to you, Godfrey, we don't have a police force in this country anymore. We have DEI detectives.
I would have a big retraining camp somewhere on the Yorkshire Moors, and they would all parade at 6:30 in the morning. They'd be on a restricted diet. They would all shave. They would all shave, or they could apply to grow a full set. You know, like the Tsar of all the Russias or James Robertson Justice. If they could go a proper beard, but they're
like
not.
my beard, yeah,
They can't be asked for 4 weeks. That's the difference. They have to sort out their uniform, polish the buttons, polish their shoes, and explain. They get lectures on P-light policing, or what they're there for, what they're supposed to do. And I would retrain them all, and anybody who didn't get it and pass a modest exam at the end, modest exam, and not a big one for exams, a modest exam, I'd throw them out. I'd throw out, I'd reallocate or something the little girls who are, 5'2", 5'3", when they're trying to deal with the people with no respect. We have these illegal immigrants who have no respect for women. That's part of their culture. They don't respect women. That's why that guy at Manchester Airport punched a woman in the face. I could no more punch a woman in the face and fly to the moon.
Yeah.
Every fibre of my being is against violence towards women. And of course, then you've got the problem on the other side, poor lassie. She burst into tears and fell to pieces. Well,
Sure.
She's a girl, for God's sake, isn't she? I tell you what, a few years ago, if he'd tried that with me, it'd have come unstuck.
I'd wager he'd still come unstuck today. And that's why a lot of people are getting fit, getting strong, regardless of their age. They are capable, or they're becoming capable, because the police, unfortunately, cannot be relied upon unless you tell them that you're a victim of racism and you're from the BAME community. But look, it's a rabbit hole that we could go down. I think I've probably, for the time that we've got today, we've looked at a good few areas. Unless there's anything that you'd like to add before you go, sir.
There are some things on which people are speculating at the moment. Anne Widdecombe is one of them.
Yeah.
There's a lot of speculation. There's one thing I try not to do, and that's speculate. I like to stack my facts together, sort it out, and let people make their own decision. But I don't like to bet. That's not really in my nature. But when we know more, when we know enough to talk sensibly about this,
yeah,
I'll come back on your show if I may, and we'll actually deconstruct exactly what has gone on this. Because I'd be interested to know.
I think that is very wise and very prudent. We can ask questions of the policing, but we can't speculate into the extent that we would like to, because we're not in possession of the full facts. So,
I'll leave that kind of thing, that kind of speculation to Kelvin Mackenzie.
Oh my God, what a very...
Along with a nice pair of tits.
He used to have a nice pair of baps, I believe, Kelvin Mackenzie himself, but he's lost a lot of weight. I don't know if he's been downing the Ozempic as we speak. But yeah, very, very lightweight, very weak man, not interested. He hasn't got a lot, and very thick. It's amazing how thick. He had Liz Truss on today. I better not get in a rant, but he had Liz Truss on. She was talking about the deep state, and he said, do you think that the Home Office, Treasury and Cabinet Office would have it in for us?
I've only seen it twice. It was on the Mike Graham show in Point of Fact. And I thought, God, he's thick. He's really thick. Do you know what one thing he said to this? He interrupted me when I was suggesting that he was actually criticising Rupert Lowe for saying that illegal immigrants should be put on a Scottish island. Sorry
Yeah.
about one of your islands.
No, I like that. I like that. Yeah.
And they could be eaten by midges, and he thought that was a disgraceful thing to say.
Yeah.
And I said to him on the chat, I said, I've got people in Yorkshire who would have fast boats with machine guns, and they would shoot. Never mind eaten by midges.
Yeah.
Never mind that. I'd shoot them with a machine gun. How's that?
And he plays the faux outrage so well, doesn't he? I bet you in conversation he says a lot worse. Put them on the rack, Spanish Inquisition, thumb screws. He's that type that tries to garner, for me, he tries to garner popularity by being this virtue signaller. I mean, he was a long time editor of tabloid rags, pumping out crap to guys and women eating their cornflakes and porridge. But look, I'm glad we're both on the same path with people like Calvin McCanzie and Andrew Neil. I didn't think it would be any other way, sir. But all that remains for me to do today, is to thank Mr. Godfrey Bloom very much for coming back onto the HIN show.